Hello everyone, you can call me Freebiewitz, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Analyze and Adapt, where I see if a video game would work in 3 different mediums. Tabletop, as in board and card games, tabletop roleplay, like Dungeons & Dragons, and finally, as a Larp. Today, we're taking a look at Star Wars Battlefront 2, specifically the 2005 version. That said, I personally enjoyed the more modern take, but I can see why people would say the single-player story campaign is a bit contrived. But I'm not here to talk about the modern version, I'm here to talk about the classic. And to think, it's been 15 years since the release of that game, and I look back fondly to it when I blasted dirty droids as a member of the 501st, but playing it again, however, well, it's not as good as I remember. It's certainly not bad, but the mechanics, graphics, and AI just don't feel as shiny as they once did, and playing it at the resolution I did revealed some graphical issues with the text and some guns clipping through my face that bugged me quite a bit. In terms of actual gameplay and story, however, I still love it, and the voice work was just wonderful. I guess I've just been taking modern touches in gaming for granted, and perhaps said modern touches have made me soft. I still like it, but like I said, it just doesn't hold up like I remember. Regardless, I'm not here to review the game, I'm here to analyze and adapt it. So let's start with Tabletop. So I'll preface this by pointing out that Star Wars as a franchise has a ton of tabletop games. It has a chess version, Monopoly variant, its own collectible card game, along with a dozen other original board games that aren't just reskins of others. Of note is Fantasy Flight's Star Wars Legion, which takes characters, both grunts and heroes, and puts them into a system that from a very brief glance reminds me of War Machine. But I'm not trying to adapt Star Wars into a tabletop game. I'm here specifically to adapt classic Star Wars Battlefront 2. So what makes Star Wars Battlefront 2 Star Wars Battlefront 2? At its core, it's about a large group of sci-fi soldiers blasting each other in famous Star Wars locations, trying to capture key positions with the occasional big-named character, like a Jedi, running in and tearing the enemy army a new one. Trying to do a one-to-one adaptation in a turn-based situation would be almost impossible, so having the player control a single troop is right out. Just imagine having over 50 players around a single table, each waiting 49 other turns for their own before they can act. Now, you can always have teams have their turns at the same time, but that's still over 50 people at the same table. Saying it'd be crowded would be an understatement. To fix this, instead of focusing on the individual, we can focus on the battle as a whole, assigning each player an army, cutting it down from over 50 players to just 2. The map would be a large area with control points scattered throughout, and all in all the basic premise and setup would start looking like a game of Warhammer 40k. However, it's at this point where we'll be diverging from that game and others like it. Unlike 40k and many other tabletop games, when a unit dies in this adaptation, we can have them respawn at friendly captured control points. In lore, it's explained as reinforcements entering the battlefield, but we'll ignore the specific hows and whys for now. Furthermore, after certain conditions are met, special units like jetpack troopers and hero characters enter the battlefield, tipping the balance of power when they do. To win, players must deplete the enemy's reserves of reinforcements or capture all points so that they can't spawn more in. As someone who plays both 40k and War Machine, games can go on for quite some time. In 40k, this is mitigated with turn limits, and in War Machine the game can end early if the Warcaster, the leader of the group, is killed. So having a preset kill limit with constant reinforcements would become very tedious very quickly. While it does happen, most other large-scale tabletop war games don't usually end with every single unit on one side dead. Even getting most of them killed takes quite some effort, and a game like Battlefront, if we adapt it this way, would ask the player to do just that multiple times as they replace their dying troops over and over again. Battles of attrition might be sometimes fun in a real-time game, but very rarely in a turn-based one. So, for the sake of making the game fun, we'd either have to strip down the larger scale battles or the reinforcement mechanics. In that regard, I'd be more than happy to take out the reinforcements, or at least drastically reduce their numbers. If I asked people to describe Battlefront with a few words, I'd imagine big battles or something similar would come up more often than reinforcements or respawning, so we'll go with that. So with big battles and the occasional Jedi coming in to wreck everyone's day, I think we have a pretty good base translation of Star Wars on tabletop. But not exactly Battlefront 2. We may have captured it in spirit, but it doesn't feel right, at least to me. Let's see if we have more luck adapting the game into another medium. Once again, Star Wars being such a huge franchise means it's already got a bunch of role-playing systems, both original and adaptations of pre-existing ones, so at least one of them will let your players get a similar experience as playing Battlefront 2, at least in spirit. In that regard, we only have to tweak a few mechanics here and there along with the specific scenarios to make it work. So which system would we use? First of all, the system we use would have to be highly lethal, with plenty of chances to gain reinforcements. The fact that many of the troops are identical, being literal clones and robots, means that the player can mechanically almost always reuse the same character sheet over and over again every time they die, especially if we choose to ignore the rebel scum. That said, special units and heroes exist as well, so I'd give the players the option of playing them once they've met certain conditions. Now here comes the next problem. Jedi in the game pretty much run at the speed of sound, dashing in and out of enemy positions to ruin their day, and while it's fun to do in the video game, it's not really a team activity. Now don't get me wrong, a good Jedi player will coordinate with their allies and use their positions to fall back to when needed, but for the most part, one group of allies is as good as another when you need to get back. I wouldn't say the game encourages the players to split the party when they have a Jedi, but it certainly doesn't discourage them either. Sure, I can limit their speed and somehow force them to stick around with the rest of the group, and while that does happen in cartoons and movies to a degree, it doesn't happen all the time in Battlefront. Keep in mind, we're not adapting Star Wars into this game, but the classic Battlefront 2 game. Keep in mind that the idea of Jedi also introduces the idea of certain party members being drastically more powerful than others. Being a Jedi in Battlefront 2 is a reward, and when you're playing as one, you're overpowered by design. Unless you're fighting a tank, that is, in which case you probably need another tank or explosives to help destroy it. But putting that aside for now, generally Jedi and other hero units are more powerful than the others. To some degree, this is balanced out in the video game by giving the non-Jedis large groups of other players to worry about. Even if the Jedi takes on a dozen enemies, there's still a dozen more to worry about, never mind the enemy Jedi himself running around, or I suppose more technically Sith. In the tabletop RPG, shifting focus all the time means that one part of the party has to wait around until the focus is back on them. So how can we fix this? Well, one option would be to just get rid of the Jedi as a playable character, and instead have them come into play as an NPC cavalry type thing, a way to bail out the party when things get dire. Now, I know this sounds like a cop-out, but let me explain. Having a Deus Ex Machina, or DMPC, might not be fun, but if it's triggered by the party calling them in with a communicator, it can be as satisfying as calling down an airstrike on an enemy position. Just treat the Jedi that way. They come in, do their thing, blow everything up like an airstrike. No need to focus on them too much beyond what they're about to do. There might be other ways to do it, but this method allows the Jedi to still be a near unstoppable killing machine while still giving the players their focus, as the Jedi would likely only be involved for a short amount of time as they dash off to another part of the battle. As an adaptation, I feel I've failed again. This version of the RPG is closer to how the original Battlefront game handled heroes in that they couldn't be directly controlled either. It might make for a better designed tabletop RPG, but it's no longer a proper adaptation of Star Wars Battlefront 2. Hence why I feel I failed. Failing to adapt this game into not just a board game, but also a tabletop RPG is a bit depressing. But I must press on to the next medium. Hopefully, the Force will be with me this time. Oh boy, where do I even start with this one? Let's start with a quick refresher on the basic gameplay of Star Wars Battlefront 2. In Star Wars Battlefront 2, you have control points scattered across the map that, when captured, allow friendly units to spawn on them. To win, you have to force the enemy to respawn and thus use up all their reinforcement points. There's a bit more to it than that, but those are the basics, at least for Conquest mode. We're just gonna ignore the other stuff for now. So I've already covered this in my Heroes of the Storm video about having melee combatants in a Larp setting with guns, or in this case blasters. But to briefly recap, we can't use soft hitting guns, or people wearing armor wouldn't feel the impact, even if they were just plastic. And if we use gel blasters or something similar, we can't have them shoot someone in melee range for safety reasons as well. That becomes difficult when you have someone with a lightsaber trying to get in melee range in the first place. Now, in the Heroes of the Storm episode, we had to balance guns and swords to encourage a good mix of different genres, but Star Wars Battlefront 2 doesn't care for the individual balance of lightsabers, so this isn't as big of an issue. The way it's balanced is that Jedi are limited in number, so having a lightsaber be overpowered, well, it's all part of the design. Now, safety is still a concern, so people with gel blasters or whatever blaster equivalent you have would still not be able to shoot people at point blank range. However, we can, as Jedi, just say they're using Jedi mind tricks or something similar and excuse it that way. We can also give Jedi extra hit points and explain it as them deflecting the shot somehow, since actually deflecting a real gel ball, while not impossible, is very difficult in real life. Otherwise, everyone else when hit with a lightsaber, other Jedis included, are just plain dead, which in my mind would lead to a lot of sword fights ending very quickly. We could also even add force powers for the Jedis. A force push, for example, would force a large group of players, upon seeing the motion, make them stop shooting for a short time and stagger backwards. A force choke would stop a player cold and kill them, while a force pull would, as the name suggests, do what a force push does, but in the other direction towards the Jedi. Or Sith, you get the point. To represent the Jedi's ability to jump really far, we can also have parts of the map, marked by little cones, act as pits or sheer drops of some kind. If a normal player walks into one or is otherwise pushed, they then fall to their death, whereas a Jedi would be able to just jump over them. Besides Jedi, we could also give Jet Troopers and similar characters this ability as well, to help flank the enemy or escape. Now with that all said, I do have one alternate suggestion to gel blasters and other hard-hitting pieces of kit, and that is lasers. Besides fitting into the theme of Star Wars, it has several practical reasons to be used as well. Years ago, back in high school, a couple of my friends wanted to play laser tag, but not just any laser tag, but one at our school itself. I don't know if the school got paid for it or if they were just doing some sort of community service deal, but the entire school for that day was booked out by the folks running the laser tag business. We kitted up, got given blocky rifles with vests, and were told to go nuts in a variety of game modes. When we shot enemies, it made a blaster sound. When we got hit, the vest would play a pain sound, and when we died, the organizers would use these large walkie-talkie-like devices that they could swipe over our guns, bringing us back to life, and therefore respawn. In particular, I fondly remember one game mode I won for my team by accident. Long story short, there was less than a minute on the clock. Me and my friend had the flag, but the capture point was heavily guarded. Our allies were far away, distracted with other issues. So, seeing no other way to win, we rushed in, and my friend was immediately cut down, leaving me to pick up the flag and just run. Just before I could get to the capture point, I was hit multiple times with the synthetic voice in my vest screaming out in pain. I fell, flailing and screaming in defeat, causing my foes to erupt into cheers. Then I looked down at my gun screen and realized that I still had 1 HP left. While they were still distracted with their celebrations, and with 10 seconds or so left on the clock, I stood up, took 2 steps forwards, and made the capture. According to the organizers, they were pretty surprised that no one had tried to play dead until that point, and were very impressed with my deception. I told them yeah, totally intentional. So based on that technology, I can easily see it being adapted into a Star Wars Battlefront 2 game mode. Each control point would have those swipes that brought people back to life. After killing a certain amount of enemies, a player could become a hero-type character and gain more HP than everyone else, allowing them to use a lightsaber-like weapon for a Jedi or a blaster that deals more damage in the case of characters like Han Solo. These changes would be announced by the vest itself. With slight tweaking, instead of each player having a limited amount of lives, the limit could be a pool for an entire team. We wouldn't have anything like a tank, of course, but the infantry part of the game with Jedis would be replicated just fine, albeit with slower Jedis. In that regard, it'd be very similar to the Death Star level in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Lightsabers in this setup could be Boffer-style weapons stored at each spawn point or something similar. The person who got hit by said lightsabers would have to press a kill button on their own kit, so this would be observed by an honor system, but for someone who plays LARP, it's nothing new to me. The fact that this is all happening real time makes me believe that LARP would work the best for this specific adaptation. That said, calling it a LARP might be a stretch. It'd be more accurate to call it a specific game mode more in laser tag than anything else. Ignoring that, I can still see people getting into characters as rebel fighters, clone commanders, etc. As long as short-lived as each session might be, everyone would still be role-playing, thus conforming to the idea that it's a LARP. Just because it's very combat heavy doesn't mean there can't be any role-playing. I may have failed adapting the game into a board game, and I might have failed doing the same with an RPG, but it looked like that it might just work as a LARP. So that's my analysis of the 2005 version of Star Wars Battlefront 2 and how it can be adapted into 3 different mediums. How do you think it'd work? Have any of you tried adapting any elements of the game yourself? And if so, how did it go? Comment, like, and subscribe, and maybe, just maybe, we'll come back to the subject sometime in the future. My name is Freebiewitz, and thank you for watching.